Hola, hola, estamos por acá otra vez. Ahora estamos de fiesta porque tenemos un súper invitado y un tema buenísimo el día de hoy. Vamos a hablar de potencia en la carrera. Los watts son un tema que siempre hemos venido tocando y en IBEN somos muy clavados, muy atascadotes con el tema de los watts, pero siempre en el ciclismo y ahora está esta onda de correr con watts. Así es que tenemos hoy ni más ni menos que un invitado especial. Me presento de una vez, Román Olivera, cofundador de IBEN, y por allá, creo que ahora sí lo voy a atinar, está Milo.
Hola a todos, yo soy Emilio Flores, soy cofundador de IBEN y realmente es un privilegio poder contar. De aquí en adelante lo vamos a tratar de hacer en inglés, por ahí pueden leer los subtítulos que van a estar ahí. I'm very happy to introduce a team member of STRYD, one of the pioneers in power running and the use of watts in running. We're here with Adam Heaney. Adam, welcome.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you guys, Roman and Emilio.
We're very pleased to have you, Adam. And we've been receiving a lot of questions of what is watts in running, and we're like, well, what better source than the source itself, you know? Can you like explain us a little bit what this whole concept of power in running means and how does it work out?
Sure. Yeah. So basically, it's very similar to power in the bike. A lot of your listeners, watchers, viewers may be familiar with that. It's basically the amount of energy that you're putting towards running. It's a way of measuring the intensity of your run. And that's it in a nutshell.
Here, I think I'm going to interrupt you here real quick because this is one of the main questions that, even though people are really happy with the whole fact that we're going to be able to measure, or we are already able to measure watts in running. And I've heard you guys talk in some other interviews explaining all about this. But really, I think the whole point is it's very confusing for someone that has been using power in cycling.
Right.
To transform and take this into running and say, okay, so what is this giving me? Because cycling, you know, I push the pedal and I know, you know, I know what it is. But here, what is it like? Is it how hard I'm hitting the ground, or you know, I think that's a big confusion. So maybe you can help us.
Sure. Yeah. So on the bike, it's an easy concept to get, right? You push on the pedals. It's the pressure you're putting on the pedal or the strain you're putting on the gauge. It can be measured in the pedal, on the crank and the hub. Whereas when you're running, there's none of those mechanical things to be pushing against. Well, what you are pushing against is the ground, right? And so the way we measure that is through the accelerations, the forces that you are applying to the ground as your foot moves through space. And we can use that knowledge of that movement, of those accelerations, of those forces, and the knowledge of how much you of your own body mass to calculate power and how much power you're producing as you move forward through space.
Okay, so it only takes in account going forward, or does it take things like going up, going to the side?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, because when you're on a bike, in a lot of ways, you're kind of locked into that frame, and when you're applying the pressure, it's directly down onto the pedal. There might be a little bit of lost power here and there. When you're running, you've got this big flexible body that's producing all this energy, and not all of that energy is necessarily going towards propelling you forward. So the STRYD does, with our STRYD power meter, we're able to measure all those forces in all those directions. So going forward, the braking motion that happens when your foot impacts the ground, some of the side-to-side motions that you might have. Some people kind of come across that mid-plane with their arms, and they're sending some of those forces going laterally, and then obviously up and down as well. How high are you going in the air when you're lifting your body up in preparation to move it forward? So we can capture all those little different pieces and understand how well the power that you're producing, how much of that and how well are you doing at propelling yourself forward towards the finish line.
So what we're understanding in between just the explanation that you gave us is that not more watts on running, it's better. Not like in the bike, right? You produce more watts per kilogram, then you're perfect, right? So down here, what would be the holy grail of running with power? I mean, what would be the equation? Because if we produce more watts laterally, then I don't know if that's going to be work out. What would be your take on that?
Right. So generally, you know, there is definitely a correlation between speed and the amount of watts you produce. If you want to go faster, you have to produce more watts. But there is a ratio that you can come up with, or your own pace to power ratio, that is going to be ideal for you, depending on your size and your particular form, that you can optimize. And by monitoring power over time, you can lower that power for that pace, which means you can carry that pace for a longer period of time because you're not expending as much energy. Or take that the other way, if you produce that same amount of power, you can actually produce more speed out of that same level of power, which gets you to the finish line faster.
Right. So in other words, really, like Emilio was saying, it's not just straightforward, like let's produce more watts, because there could be a point where you're producing more watts, but you're going slower, right? Like your pace, or because you're losing form, or something like that, right? So I think that's why. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a great point. When I think about this, is every morning I'm a morning runner, and I get up in the morning, and if I don't go through my pre-run routine of, you know, mobility drills and this kind of thing, I'll go out there and I'll look down at my watch, and I'm running 10-minute miles, and I see 300 watts, and it gives me a little shake, because I know that usually 300 watts for me is closer to under 7-minute pace. But what's happening is it's taking my body some time to kind of loosen up, to shaken up, and my form becomes more fluid, then my power drops for that as my pace is increasing, in fact. So so the opposite of that happens when you're racing. As you fatigue, you may start producing more power, but not able to actually maintain the same amount of pace. So all these things can factor in, and you can actually target specific parts of your run form to help improve your power over time.
So with this said, the power meter will give you a lot of data, right? Would we literally, there's a lot of questions. Would we need like a coach to tell us exactly what all of this data means? Or would it be like, we'll just have to go into some software and then look at 3 values and say, hey, listen, I'm going to work on these just 3 values? Or what kind of metrics does it give you? What kind of feeling does it give you running with power?
Okay, so the basic idea was to be able to boil it down to one number. Boil it down to power, and just use that as a way of giving you that information and that feedback while you run. And so you can just use that, but in order to calculate power, we actually are able to. STRYD is able to assess a variety of other things as well, and so we can look at your cadence, your ground contact time, your vertical oscillation. There's a lot of different metrics that we can look at that you can then use to inform how your power is being used, and how efficiently it's being used, and so you can be more efficient of your power when you run.
So one of the things also that we get a lot of questions is how much can we trust this? Because it's all new, so one of the things that we've been looking at ourselves, studying this, reading through this, reading through the book and everything, the Jim Vance book and all, and all the data that you guys have and whatever, just studying this a lot. One of the things that we realize is the device should not be an issue. Like, the device seems to be really something that we can be really confident on. But basically, where we're still working as an industry is learning how to use all this data, right? Like, there's so much data that we can get from it that we still don't know if this value is going to be optimal, or this other value, or how do we work with this or with that, right? So there's a lot of, I guess that's where we are. But can we give people like the confidence that this is not a thing that today gives me a 10% reading lower than what tomorrow is going to give me?
Right. So that's a big concern. The consistency of the readings, especially comes from the bike power meter. When you're in different temperatures, the the metal itself will change, so that the power reading that the bike power meter gets is not as accurate. Well, that's not the case with STRYD, because we're not actually measuring the physical torque that's happening. We're measuring your motion through space. So that's very, very, very consistent. And unlike other measures of intensity, like heart rate, like pace, it's not as it is not influenced by outside influences. So your heart rate, for example, when you are dehydrated, as you go through a race, a marathon, half marathon, and you get dehydrated, you may experience some cardiac drift. Your heart rate slowly elevates as you go. We also know that heart rate increases or changes due to stress. It can change due to a caffeine intake. So there's a lot of influences to your heart rate that are not necessarily going to be influenced by. You're not going to see that in power. Whereas pace, the same thing. The pace, the amount of effort you're putting towards does not necessarily correspond directly to your pace. If you're running on a trail versus a track versus a road, the amount of intensity is not going to be the same. If you're going up a hill or down a hill, the amount of intensity for the speed is not going to be the same. Whereas with power, your intensity is always the same. When you're working hard, it's going to equal that number.
So sorry, just to close this one out, which actually it was one of the questions that we had. And you really just helped us out. Right? Like, no, really, being able to understand the difference between what we already use, which is heart rate and pace, and how different would it be using power. So, just to follow through on that, so we can really trust our zones. Like if we come up with like we do a test like we do with a power meter in the bike, and we come up with an FTP, and then from there we get our zones, so we can really trust that if we're working at each specific zone, we're working different systems, right? I mean, that we can trust that.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we recommend you do the test on a track. Where we know that intensity and speed are going to be right in line with each other. Right. So when we do the test there in that really standardized environment, we can then use that to calculate your critical power, which is like the FTP, the amount of power that you can sustain for an hour, just under an hour. And from there, we can calculate your zones, so that we know that when you're working at 250 to 300 watts, that's your aerobic threshold. If you're working at this is your lactate threshold. When you're doing this is your repetition threshold. So we know what each of these zones are, so that you're always working the correct system, and so that when you lay out your training plan, and you need this amount of aerobic work, and you need this amount of neuromuscular work, that you're getting that exact amount, so you're dialing in your training exactly. Because really, when you're out there training, we're all busy. You don't have time for junk miles, right? You need each and every workout to be producing a result that you're looking for. And so by being able to dial in those zones exactly, you're really saving a lot of time.
Adam, we've been getting a lot of questions. The size of the device. I know that you guys have been going through a lot of development, and sometimes you used to have it on the heart rate strap, but now you have more like a foot pod. Is that correct?
Yep. So the original device was a chest mounted on a heart rate. We were able to get heart rate that way as well. So the thing we were trying to figure out, so we went through a couple different ways of trying to decide what location to put it on, whether it be the foot. We went through put it on the waistband of shorts at one point.
Yeah, in the back, right? Yeah, the first. Yeah. Was that the very first?
Well, that was kind of the second iteration.
All right.
The reason for that, we decided not to go with that. We found that, well, one thing, people were throwing their shorts away with the device, and so we didn't want that to happen. The other is different shorts are worn at different places on people's bodies. Yeah. And so that became inconsistent, and also even people with the same short, they would kind of play with them as they're running, and so then that's kind of messing up the data that you're collecting. So we went to the chest strap because people generally wear the chest strap in the same place every time. It became very consistent. Problem there is Roman may wear his chest strap in different places there. I wear mine, and I wear it different from Emilio wears it. So it's hard to compare across people. So eventually we decided to come back to the idea of wearing it on a foot. And so I actually have it right here on our shoe here. It's just a small little pod that clips to places. got the size. It's very light. It's only a couple grams. Easily clips on and off your shoe, so you can transfer between shoes very easily. If you're warming up in your training shoes, then want to put on some faster racing shoes, it happens very quick.
It doesn't need calibration, and it's a lot cheaper than the power meter on the bike. That's sure.
Yeah, it's a lot cheaper than the power meter on the bike, and it self-calibrates with each and every step. It knows where it is. It's now every impact. It says, okay, I'm at 0, and recalibrates and goes again. So it's measuring each and every step. So we get very accurate distance and very accurate pace from that, and then the power readings are going to be consistent from that as well.
I'm just getting ahead. One of the questions that I know we're going to be getting from a lot of athletes is, why do my power zones in the bike are not the same as my power zones when I'm running, or are they? That'll be the question.
Well, let me take that back a little bit too. So, because I was going to mention this, but I got off track a little bit. So when you're talking about consistency of measurement of power, so other reason we know that's going to be consistent is we have verified everything in 3 different ways. We verified it on a force plate treadmill, double force plate treadmill. So you're running on the treadmill, and it's calculating the forces. We know that our STRYD device is getting the same thing that power on the treadmill is doing. We've also done the high-speed cameras motion capture. So the guys with the ping pong balls on their bodies, we've seen on TV. So we did that, had our runner there running through there with that motion capture. So we knew the STRYD. We knew that it was going exactly where it told us it was going. And the last piece is VO2 max testing, metabolic testing. So we know that as your effort increases and the more oxygen you're requiring to fuel your muscles, we are seeing that corresponds exactly to what we're seeing with the intensity that we're saying is happening with the pod as well. So those 3 ways, we kind of came at it from multiple different ways of being able to know that consistently that's the measurement that we're getting, and it corresponds to how intensity you're running. And then to come back to the other question, I just lost it.
No, it was just how different are the zones from the bike.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So they are going to be different. And one of the big reasons is, as we kind of mentioned before, it's because of our flexible body. We're losing some power to our flexibility, to our movement, to this lateral, to the braking forces that are happening on every impact, to the vertical, going too high. So we actually are able to break out, not to get into too deep a dive, but we're able to break out the amount of power that you produce that is dedicated just to your individual form. So we know that the power, and it's somewhere in between 20% and 30% of the power that you produce is going directly towards your form. Mm-hmm. Some of that power is necessary, because if you don't generate some power up, you're not going anywhere. Your feet are stuck to the ground. So you need to lift up your center of mass up into the air a little bit, enough so that you can roll along when you're running. So you can do that very inefficiently, right? Or you can do that quite efficiently. And so we're able to kind of capture that. And so then we provide that feedback over time as you do your different running drills, mobility drills, plyometrics, strength training, and you can tighten up that form a little bit. So more of the power that you are producing is going towards running fast.
So I think that's one of the main things that's going to make it different from cycling, and also in a good way, I think, because we're going to be able to make corrections and changes on the spot, right? As opposed to maybe the bike, you have to go and maybe, adjust your height or your bike feet or whatever, just to make a few changes. But here, and the other point that I'm getting here is, power is not the only metric that we're reading here, right? So we're going to use a bunch of metrics and be able to come up with pretty rich information that's going to help us on the spot and later, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So power is just one piece, and that's kind of the big picture piece. As I said, kind of boils it down to one number that we can all relate to. But there are other components to that, such as ground contact time. So as you fatigue, you spend more time on the ground. And so there are things that you can do to improve your ground contact time. Your vertical oscillation, I've alluded to that a little bit. So if you become a little too bouncy, you're spending too much power going up, instead of kind of keeping it at a nice even place to propel yourself forward. All these things you can change, you can adjust through conscious change. You can talk to your coach, you can say, okay, hey, let's think about quick feet. Let's talk about quick feet. And then you increase your cadence and you decrease your ground contact time. But those things aren't necessarily sustainable for more than, your coach's, where you can hear your coach.
Right. Yeah.
But you can do certain drills to improve those over time. So using the metrics to understand what are my limitations right now, what do I need to improve, and what are my strengths, you can build your workouts around that to really focus on improving some of those limitations, to build upon some of those strengths, so that they become lasting changes, they become part of your natural form instead of this conscious form that my coach is whispering in my ear.
Right.
Yeah. And one way so you can use the power too is you can play with those form changes. So you can say, what happens when I tend to run like this? What happens if I drop my shoulders? Does that have an effect on my power? If I think about driving my knee forward as I run, what does that do to my power? And then you can use these as conscious cues later on in your race, for example, in that last mile when you're fatiguing, when you're really just trying to get to the finish line, you start using those as cues. Okay, I know I'm supposed to drop my shoulders. I know I'm supposed to focus on bringing my knee forward. That's where those conscious changes, those in the moment influences can really make a difference.
All right.
Okay. Well, I think that with this final explanation, we'll close it out for today. We're going to upload a couple more about STRYD and the metric that it gives us. Adam, thank you very much. Where can we find you, Adam?
Yeah, we're at stryd.com. That's STRYD.com. You can find a lot of information there about the metrics, about the device. You can buy it, $199. And you can also get links to lots of other articles about pros that have used the device and a lot of other stories like that.
You ship to anywhere, right? Like yeah.
Yeah, we ship worldwide. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Pretty good. Okay. All right. So, esto fue la plática que tuvimos hoy con la gente de STRYD y creo que va a ser muy interesante seguir platicando con ellos sobre otros temas más a fondo de los conceptos más allá de los watts que el dispositivo nos puede dar. Por ahora creo que lo dejamos por acá, Milo. Estuvo muy bueno, muy interesante. Mándenos preguntas porque tenemos contacto directo con ellos y nos pueden ayudar a entender muchas cosas que estamos apenas empezando a comprender en este sentido, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, pues nos despedimos. Román Olivera, cofundador de IVEN por acá, y Milo.
Emilio Flores, cofundador de IVEN. Nos pueden encontrar en www.facebook /IVEN Labs o en nuestros Instagrams que aparecerán abajo. Les mandamos a todos un abrazo y gracias por acompañarnos.
Thank you, Adam.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Adam.